As long as there have been road vehicles, there have been people modifying and rebuilding them to run on railways. Most of the time this is done for fun or simply to cut corners, but it's often the case that a road vehicle modified to run on a railway is less effective than an actual purpose-built locomotive. There have been exceptions, however, the most effective of which involved traction engines. Born in 1824, Thomas Aveling became an apprentice to a farmer, and by 1851 ran his own farm in Rutkinge. In 1859, he noted how portable steam engines would have to be towed around by horses, and felt that it was a waste of time given that these engines could produce enough power to drive themselves. He modified a Clayton and Shuttleworth portable engine so that it was capable of moving under its own power, resulting in the first ever successful traction engine. The engine also had the power to plough, pull heavy loads, and kept its flywheel so it could power threshing machines, saws, and other farm equipment. After refining the design, he started his own company to sell the engines, eventually partnering with Richard Porter to create Aveling and Porter. Aveling continued to develop his machines, inventing the steamroller in 1867. While steamrollers and ploughing engines were their biggest sellers, like many other companies at the time, Aveling and Porter also decided to build railway locomotives too. Most other manufacturers would build locomotives from the ground up as locomotives. Aveling, however, felt that it would be easier to instead simply modify his existing traction engines by mounting a traction engine boiler onto a new set of frames and replacing their road wheels with flanged railway wheels. They produced a handful of small tank engines in 1865 for use on both standard and narrow gauge railways, initially using a 2-2-0 wheel arrangement, with the rear wheels using the same gearing and drive as their road-going counterparts. Aveling also produced an 040 design using a chain to connect and power the driving wheels, though later designs swapped this out for a large gear instead. These engines mostly found themselves working in quarries, dockyards, harbours, and various tramways, but weren't quite as fast or as powerful as many other contemporary shunting engines, most rarely having more than 10 horsepower thanks to their small boiler and single cylinder. Their lack of oomph, however, was more than made up for with their practicality. Their gearing allowed them to tackle relatively steep grades with ease, their weight and size meant they could handle tight bends and poorly laid rails in quarries and harbours, and the engines retained their flywheels, meaning they could power auxiliary equipment such as stone crushers, grinding mills, and pumps if required, saving the need for extra stationary or traction engines to work on site. Their speed was rarely an issue anyway, as most places they worked required them to operate at low speeds. Despite their lack of horsepower, they were still able to handle heavy loads, it being noted they were able to haul 15 loaded wagons totaling 45 tons around the Gray's Chalk Quarry. Another aspect that made them popular was their affordability. Aveling and Porter's engines were cheap to build and modify compared to other industrial tank engines, most units costing about £530 each. They also consumed a minimal amount of fuel, most estimates working out to less than £5 of coal needing to be burned for every ton hauled. As such, the engines soon paid for themselves in fuel savings alone. And finally, what made them more preferable for industrial work than a standard engine was how easy they were to operate, as the locomotives possessed the same gearing and controls as road traction engines. As such, workers familiar with traction engines could easily operate them, and new workers could learn the controls quickly, meaning the company didn't need to hire qualified engine drivers. Aveling and Porter built just over 40 locomotives for industrial use, but most found their niche as shunting engines in quiet yards and quarries. As practical as they were, their lack of power led to many busy industries opting for more conventional shunting engines instead, as they were often faster, stronger, and made to keep up with a constant heavy workload. But for places such as gasworks, distilleries, and quarries, where only a handful of wagons would need shunting over a short distance, they were ideal. The last Aveling and Porter locomotive was built in 1926, though by this point the design was considered out of date. Regardless, a handful continued to work until the 1960s before finally being withdrawn. 5 of Aveling and Porter's locomotives have been preserved, including Sydenham that worked the Erith Oil Works, Sir Vincent that worked the British Oil and Cake Mills, and Blue Circle that worked the Holborough Cement Works. The Aveling and Porter locomotives, while certainly not the best shunting and short-distance engines to have been built, their simplicity, affordability, utility, and overall practicality made them a pretty useful asset on many railways. Considering they were the 19th century equivalent of bolting locomotive wheels to a tractor, they turned out pretty good. All that being said, just don't expect to make the next great shunting engine by swapping out your car's tyres for some steel wheels. Subscribe for more.